Hello everyone, this is part 20 of What If Naruto Was Abused and Leaves Konoha, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
It was surprising to Naruto how little had to be said before the three friends returned to exactly how things were before they left. Well, not quite. Naruto couldn't tear his eyes away from Tayuya half the time, he was just astounded by how beautiful she had become. He noticed similar looks from other guys as they walked through the streets and unconsciously moved closer to Tayuya, grasping her hand in his. If she noticed or cared, she didn't say anything, but the smallest of smiles tweaked in the corner of her lips. They were all making their way back from the training ground towards the Kazekage mansion, idly chatting about various interesting things that had gone on while they were all separated. Naruto was currently telling him about the Raikage's Iron Claw Jutsu, one that made Naruto shudder just thinking about. In the time he had spent in Kumo, it wasn't just B who had received that particular punishment. That earned him a round of laughs, especially from Gaara, who only knew the Raikage as the stoic and intimidating man he acted as while on business. The peace treaty between Suna and Kumo, and by extension Konoha, had gone through smoothly and without problem. Gaara would now regularly send for advice from A, who was more than willing to help out a young Kage, remembering when he had first been given the position after his father died. Due to the nature of Tayuya's mission, many of her stories wouldn't exactly be considered funny, but she was able to tell of the few times she royally screwed the Akatsuki over without them even realizing. She had found out a lot about the group during her 2 years, actually meeting with Sasori and some of the other members a few times. She now had a perfect list of all the current members, including the wannabe Toby, as well as their targets. Naruto found it amusing when she informed him that he had dropped off their radar almost a year ago and Itachi and Kisame had been assigned to Fu. It made him feel almost good that he had outsmarted the Akatsuki, even if he didn't realize it at the time. He began to worry about Yugito when Tayuya told him about Hiden and Kakazu, the supposed immortals of Akatsuki. However, having these descriptions was good, it gave him a better idea of who he was up against, and now he could plan accordingly for each possible encounter. Already the cogs in his mind were turning, preparing him for those fights. What worried him most were the descriptions of the leader of the Akatsuki, the man that none of them had met and only seen by proxy through the magic body lantern technique. By the time they got back to the Kazekage mansion, it was already getting dark, the fight having lasted longer than either of them thought. They walked through the hallways as Tayuya and Naruto smiled, remembering their lives here. Fu just looked awed, she wasn't used to such luxurious trappings. Even if Gaara personally disliked them, they were more for show as a symbol of status. In actuality, he just let Matsuri deal with things like that, she was better and more willing anyway. I trust you to remember where your rooms were. He made sure to stress the word rooms, which elicited a blush from both Naruto and Tayuya. She had never truly had a room of her own, always sneaking into Naruto's. However, this time she set a smirk on her face and just turned to Gaara confidently. Yeah, but I think I'll just stay in Naruto's room. Gaara actually raised an eyebrow, or he would have if he had any, and Naruto stared at Tayuya in a little bit of shock. Really, Tayuya? She just nodded with a smile, one that spoke of pain if he continued to speak about it and cause her more embarrassment. It was hard enough to admit even that much. Before he could do so, she grabbed his hand and started pulling him along the corridors, much to both Gaara and Matsuri's amusement. Fu spared a confused look between the fleeing couple and the laughing one before chasing after her brother. She caught up to them just as Tayuya was trying to drag Naruto into their room. Oh Fu, I guess you can have Tayuya's old room if she doesn't mind. The redhead just looked around, only just noticing the mint-haired girl's presence. Oh, that's alright I guess. Fu smiled confusedly, not understanding why the conversation had suddenly become so awkward. Tayuya coughed loudly before letting go of Naruto's arm and turning around to Fu. Hi, I guess we haven't had a chance to talk properly yet, huh? Fu just smiled and stuck out a hand. I'm Fu Uzumaki. Tayuya chuckled while smirking at Naruto. Well, she's definitely been traveling with you for 2 years, shithead. Fu pouted a little, not sure whether or not to take that as a compliment or not. Why do you call Onisan, shithead? Aren't you his girlfriend? Tayuya chuckled nervously with her hand on the back of her head. It seemed if you spent enough time around Naruto you picked up that trait. Yeah, it's complicated, but he knows I'm only joking. Naruto just nodded reassuringly from behind her back and Fu just smiled sweetly. So if Onisan loves you, can I call you Onisan? Tayuya's breath caught in the back of her throat and Naruto's eyes widened a bit at the question. Tayuya was positively shocked. She had barely met this girl and she was already treating her like family. Tayuya never had a proper family before, none that she would actually call as such anyway. I guess. Fu just beamed before turning on a heel and vanishing into the room across the hall. Tayuya was just left there gawking as Naruto put a comforting hand on her shoulder. Are you alright, Tayuya-chan? She shook her head of the shock and turned back to him so he could see her eyes begin to tear up. Tayuya, are you crying? Her eyes opened wider and she immediately rubbed her eyes free of the salty liquid. What? Fuck no. I don't cry, so shut the fuck up. She brushed past him into their room and after a moment of curious hesitation he followed her in. She was sitting on his bed, looking out the window at the view of Suna stretching out into the distance. He walked over and sat down next to her, letting her lean her head on his shoulder. She really meant it, you know. Fu's one of the nicest people I have ever met. Before me there wasn't anybody she could trust, now she wants to have precious people like her Onisan. He chuckled at that, knowing how his words inspired her always warmed his heart. Tayuya just nodded, not taking her head off of Naruto's shoulder but still not allowing the tears to fall. I missed you, Tayuya-chan. She finally looked around, a small smile on her lips and a genuine happiness in her eyes. Yeah, I missed you too, Naruto. He smiled and gave her a soft kiss on the cheek, pulling away to see her face flush pink for a moment before she caught herself. Now that her attention was off of Fu, a devious smile that Naruto recognized too well graced her features. So how did you like those photos I sent you anyway? Naruto smirked as well, happy that Tayuya was more or less back to her old self. Later, both were suddenly shocked from the pleasurable embrace by an enormous explosion ripping through the air outside. Tayuya wasn't quite lost to her visceral side enough to ignore such a blatant noise and looked up curiously as multiple explosions lit up the night sky. She also noticed the large white bird flying around while somebody riding it battled endless waves of sand. Deidara. It was more of a shocked whisper but Naruto caught it, his eyes hardening and his lips forming into a grimace. He lifted himself off of Tayuya's prone body and threw on his coat, not finding time for anything else. Tayuya, stay here, if he sees you then your cover in the Akatsuki will be blown. Tayuya couldn't argue, right now she had difficulty moving her arms from the nerve-wracking experience she had just gone through. She panted on the bed as she continued to stare up at the battle raging on high above the village as Gaara valiantly fought for both himself and his village. I am going to fucking kill that asshole for ruining my reunion with Naruto. Naruto rushed through the halls of the Kazekage mansion, skidding through hallways that he knew from memory until he was outside. He stared up at the sky as it was lit up in explosion after explosion against Gaara's indestructible sand. He had to find a way to get up there to help him, but this was an aerial battle and he had no way of flying. A grin lit up his face when he realized that wasn't true. He took a deep breath and prayed that he had enough materials for this. He unsealed a single Fujin no Iki kunai and threw it up into the air as high as it would go, which was fairly high considering his strength. Once it reached the apex of its climb, Naruto quickly flashed to it, grabbing it as soon as he appeared. In one fluid motion he launched the kunai again in mid-air and quickly flashed again. He shouted out in joy when it worked and he managed multiple flashes in quick succession. Now that he knew it worked, he repeated this process further towards Gaara's battle and 3 flashed of blonde later he was right next to his friend who made him a floating platform without even thinking about it consciously. Gaara, how are you doing? The stoic sand user didn't turn as he continued to manipulate his large streams of sand through the air in such vast quantities it made him look like he was ripping the desert apart. Naruto had never seen him use such control before, nor hold such large amounts in the air while simultaneously manipulating it in more and more complicated maneuvers in an attempt to hit the flighty artist. He is proving difficult to strike and contain due to his bird. Naruto just smiled and nodded. Get rid of the bird, gotcha. A little boost would be appreciated. Gaara just nodded and in an instant the sand Naruto was standing on launched him forward like a little bullet straight into Deidara's path. The enormous clay bird veered out of the way but Naruto threw his kunai faster, embedding it into its soft side. In a flash he was in top of the bird, surprising its blonde rider. How the hell did you get up here? Naruto smiled innocently before punching the man square in the face to capitalize on his shock. Unfortunately Naruto's hand passed straight through the man, and not in the good way. His fist was suddenly surrounded in clay as he heard an ominous and deadly hissing from beneath him. Acting on pure instincts alone he threw out a kunai in any random direction and flashed to it, hoping he was far enough away from the blast. He wasn't. The edge of the shockwave caught him in midair, knocking him so that he went spiraling through the air, clutching his shoulder. Luckily a soft blanket of sand awaited him before he dropped too far and cushioned his fall enough that he wasn't squashed flat. The sand brought him around to where Gaara still hadn't moved. Well, I got rid of the bird. Gaara smirked but quickly pointed down to where another clay bird was weaving through the streets of Suna, complete with another Deidara riding on its back. You got rid of a bird. Naruto just scowled as he looked at the Iwa missing Nin dodge wave after wave of sand. How much clay has that guy got? Gaara's face just hardened with resolve. Not as much as I have sand. With a near imperceptible narrowing of Gaara's eyes, the sand pursuing the crazed bomber sped up, nearly scraping along the clay bird's tail, feathers. The effeminate man seemed shocked by this and veered off into a side street, which just so happened to be blocked by a large wall of sand with sharpened spikes. He swerved back up into the air where Naruto was now waiting for him. He dropped down off of the sand platform and tried to grab onto the bird's wings. Deidara managed to swerve away but not before Naruto was able to lightly brush the wing, and that was all he needed. With a mere thought he instantly transported himself to Deidara's position. This time he successfully grabbed onto the wing and used it as leverage to pull himself around and smack the Iwa Nin in the back of the head with his foot. This time he struck lucky and the blonde was sent hurtling off of his own bird with a surprised look on his face which turned into a frown as his hands formed a seal. Maybe this will get you to appreciate my art. Naruto already knew what was coming and had jumped away in time to avoid the worst of the explosion. Okay, that is getting really annoying. He cursed as he watched Deidara sail by on yet another bird while he fished out another kunai to launch at him. This time the bomber had wised up and began to weave violently so that Naruto couldn't get a look on him or a kunai close enough. Instead he allowed Gaara to catch him with a sand platform and took a few seconds to catch his breath. Using the Fujin no Ikisa often was really starting to take its toll, and it was times like these that he wished he had wings like Fu. He took a deep breath and clutched his wrist, creating as large a Rasengan as he could without it blowing up in his face. It turned out that it was fairly large, about half the size of himself. He quickly attached a few chakra thread and began to slowly spin on the sand platform faster and faster. He let the Rasengan out of his hand and it swung around him like an enormous and deadly hammer toss. He kept gaining speed but never lost sight of Deidara as his pseudo-flail sped up until he was a bright blue circle in the sky. Rasengan mace. All in one instance he let it go, the deadly sphere of energy launching out at impossible speed, connecting with the clay bird and shearing straight through one of its wings, causing Deidara to lose balance and nearly fall off. Instead he just put his hand down and fed more clay into the bird, repairing the wing so he could come out of the nose dive. Unfortunately for him he forgot the blazing ball of energy right behind him. He was promptly reminded when it burst apart in a brilliant display of fireworks that tore through the man and his bird like paper. Naruto huffed heavily as he dropped to one knee. The control he had exerted over that Rasengan was tremendous. He sighed deeply as he heard a chuckle far behind him, only to turn and see yet another Deidara astride yet another bird. Oh Kami, damn it, where are you getting all this clay? Deidara just smirked from his position on the hovering bird. Ah, but an artist never reveals his secrets. He smiled more deviously even as his hands gorged on the clay in his satchels. I'll admit your art was impressive and brilliant, but it doesn't quite have the simple flair and creativity that mine does. Naruto didn't know what this guy was talking about. What did art have to do with any of this? Unfortunately he didn't get a chance to ask as the man quickly formed something in his hands before a few dozen little bird appeared in front of him. Naruto was too tired to dodge fast enough as the exploding bird came closer. He closed his eyes and hoped Gaara had enough time to block the explosions with his sand. Something did block the explosions, but it wasn't a wall of sand like Naruto had expected. Then he saw a flutter of green wings before a body dropped from the sky. FUU. Naruto watched helplessly in slow motion as Fu's crumpled body dropped through the sky. Bringing up reserves of energy he didn't even know he had. Naruto launched himself from the sand platform. He fell as fast as he could, streamlining his body and forcing chakra to his feet in a vain attempt to speed up his descent. Finally he caught up to Fu's body, her wings fluttering uselessly as the harsh winds battered her thin body. Naruto caught her and forced them both around in the air until she was on top of him, intending to use his own body to cushion her fall. They impacted the ground with a crash that was heard through the streets nearby, sending a plume of dust and debris into the air. Naruto groaned painfully from the drop. He felt all the places in his back and legs that were fractured and broken. He didn't care that much. His hands were frantically checking over Fu's body. Her skin was a little burnt in places, but the medic would be able to deal with that. He sighed deeply as he felt a strong pulse from her neck. She must have used Chomai's chakra to shield herself from the worst of the blast. Her eyes opened weakly and blinked a few times as she wondered what happened that made her end up in a rather deep crater. She groaned as she felt Naruto's hands checking over her body and turned meekly in a sluggish and painstaking movement. She turned enough that she could crane her neck and look at Naruto with her piercing, but now slightly cloudy orange eyes. How did I do, Onisan? She tried to laugh to make the situation less tense, but it came out as a racking cough. Naruto just smiled kindly back at her, not letting her see just how much pain he was in. You did great, Imuoto. She nodded tiredly with a small smile on her face before passing out in his arms. Gently he laid her to one side, slowly getting back to his jarred and quickly mending feet. He waited until a group of medics rushed over and pulled Fu onto a stretcher. The medic shinobi were all looking at him with awe. Nearly everybody watching the fight had seen him fall and none were expecting him to even live. They forgot just how tenacious Naruto Uzumaki was. A deep throaty growl reverberated from his throat as he looked back up into the air to the still ongoing fight. He seemed to have missed something as Deidara's cloak now fluttered uselessly behind him on one arm. He grinned slightly maliciously, red oozing chakra already gushing out of his pores and increasing the feral nature of his look. By the end of this fight he fully intended to rip the bomber's other arm off for what he tried to do to Fu. It never crossed his slightly frenzied mind that Fu had merely gotten in the way of an attack meant for him. The non-cubified Naruto could deal with those consequences later. With a leap not possible for normal humans and even most shinobi, Naruto took to the air, leaving spider web cracks from the force of his feet leaving the ground. He ricocheted off a nearby tall building and nearly caved in the wall as his feet deftly pushed off it. His hands formed hand signs, one each, and instantly a shadow clone appeared in front of him in the air. He used it like a stepping stone, launching off its prone form before it dispersed from the impact, and another was created in its place to continue the cycle. Naruto was now literally running across a path of himself through the air, chasing down the crazed bomber at incredible speeds. Deidara looked back as he continued to dodge sand, slowly working in his contingency plan as his severed hand fed his exploding clay into Gaara's sand. He noticed a flaming Naruto charging him down and his eyes opened wide, but only briefly. He had never seen anybody so recklessly throw away chakra like that. Then again, he was dealing with what could potentially be the most powerful of the Jinchuriki. He motioned his bird to move faster, but Naruto just matched his acceleration, continuing to gain ground on the blonde missing nin. He grimaced, already reaching into his satchel to make another bird after the moron fell for his trick again, only for a very strong and burning hot hand to grab onto his wrist before it could touch his clay. He looked up in shock right into Naruto's red-slitted eyes, which stared back at him in absolute unquenchable fury. Quickly Deidara secreted what little clay he had in his hand through the pores in his arm. He detonated it in an attempt to rid himself of the other blonde's hand, which was slowly but surely crushing the bones in his arm. It didn't work. The chakra coating around Naruto proved too resilient even for Deidara's Shi won, and the blast was redirected back onto the bomber himself. He winced in pain. He was used to explosions from all his experimentation, but it still hurt like hell to have a blast go off that close to his skin. Naruto just growled again, not pleased that the explosion didn't take Deidara's arm off. Intending to finish the job, he placed a firm chakra-coated foot on the Iwa nin's back and pulled. Deidara may have already had one arm crushed by Gaara's sand, but this was a whole different level of pain. He could feel the individual muscles and tendons in his arm strain and snap under the pressure until it became too much and his arm was ripped off at the shoulder, sending a spurt of blood into the air. Deidara's scream was heard for hundreds of meters throughout the village as even a few shinobi winced at the sound. Naruto just stared at the arm he was holding, throwing it away from him in disgust before returning his attention to the blonde in front of him. By now the bird beneath the two of them was crumbling away as Deidara lost focus on it, unable to channel his chakra any longer. They dropped from the sky, but Naruto didn't want it to be over yet. His crazed and angry mind only wanted to prolong the man's pain, to make him suffer for what he had tried to do. He caught him on the way down by the throat and grabbed the wall of a building as they fell down. His clawed hands created deep gashes that sent out bursts of dust and debris where claw met masonry until the two came to an almost gentle stop on the ground. They were in the middle of a wide street where normally people could be seen bustling about as they went about the daily routines. Now it was eerily quiet due to all the civilians being relocated away from the dangerous fighting. Naruto threw the man he was holding to the floor harshly, letting his back crack the paving stones beneath him with the force of it. The man's face was contorted in a pitiful attempt to mask his pain, unable to even clutch his wound to staunch the ever-increasing pool of blood growing beneath him. He had been able to cauterize his other arm with his clay, but without either arm that wasn't a possibility. To Naruto's displeasure, the man just started laughing, a weak but irritating chuckle that increased in volume. "What's so damn funny?" Deidara just shook his head with a small smile, almost regretfully if Naruto were inclined to believe him even a little. "In the end my art just wasn't enough." He coughed harshly, unable to cover his mouth due to a lack of arms. And I didn't even get to reveal my masterpiece. He sighed regretfully before he was enveloped in another fit of coughs. He was still smiling though, something that pissed off Naruto to no end. He was about to go over and finish the dying man quickly before his coughs once again turned into laughs. Before Naruto could do anything, Deidara gagged slightly before spitting out a lump of clay that looked like a wailing ghost. Naruto just stared at it, knowing it was a bomb of some kind but unsure of the scale of its explosion. Deidara had called it his masterpiece, so Naruto was wary. However, before the man could take up a new monologue as his dying words, Naruto reacted purely on instincts he didn't even know existed. He dashed across the street and scooped up the strange clay doll before in one movement he swallowed it whole. His mouth turned into a grimace as he tasted the second-hand clay before he felt it nestle in his stomach. Deidara just looked at him with wide eyes, not expecting that at all. He just thought it was some kind of desperate attempt to stop him. He activated the bomb with the last lingering remains of his chakra. "You have no appreciation for art. True art is an explosion." Naruto felt a rumble in his stomach as Kyuubi's chakra invaded his insides, coating the lining of his stomach and throat before his body expanded to ridiculous proportions. The pressure was intense, and even with his pain-nullifying chakra cloak, Naruto's eyes watered. His neck expanded to match his body before he felt the pressure was too great and he opened his mouth, right at Deidara. The wide-eyed bomber could only watch as the condensed energy from the explosion, in the form of a thin stream of white light, hurtled towards him. Beautiful. And then Deidara was no more, disintegrated by the heat and intensity of the blast into nothing but dust. Naruto dropped to the ground, feeling Kurama already trying to fix his stretched-out muscles and ligaments from the pseudo-tailed beast bomb. It was a lot weaker than one he had seen B do as an example, but it was enough to create an enormous trench along the ground, reaching all the way down the street but stopping just before it hit a building. Gaara floated down to his position gently, looking slightly worn out from the fight but not exhausted like Naruto felt. Naruto just offered up a hand to show he was okay, and Gaara backed off with a nod, knowing by now just to let Naruto heal from these things at his own pace. After 5 minutes he felt well enough to stand, albeit shakily, and looked over to the massive trench he had created. He gulped at the damage before his eyes found a scorch mark at the very beginning of the trench and he stumbled towards it. There was nothing left of Deidara. He was completely gone, wiped from the earth like he had never been there to begin with. He stood a little taller, a weak smile managing to make it onto his face despite the pain he was feeling. Gaara walked over again and held out his hand. Confused, Naruto did the same and Gaara dropped a ring into his palm. It was an ornate teal-colored ring with the kanji for blue and green inscribed on it. "That's one." Naruto nodded grimly. This ring marked their first step in taking down the Akatsuki for good. They always work in pairs. Come on, his partner should be around here somewhere, and if he had to fly in, I'd say the seconds around the gates. Gaara nodded and the two of them set off. Naruto was slightly winded, but as they ran he felt his strength returning as his unnatural regeneration took care of it. Gaara knew exactly what his teammates' limitations were and just allowed him to run, knowing the stubborn blonde would come even if he ordered Naruto not to. They made quick work of getting to the gates. Gaara had ways through the city that nobody else could manage by bringing down entire walls of sandstone with a simple hand gesture before reforming it behind him. Likewise, Naruto was one of the fastest people alive, and he veered through street after street, zigzagging at speeds that sent loose papers into the air as he passed by. They both rejoined at the same time in front of the long passage, both stopping on a dime when they both realized the same thing. Where are the guards? Gaara's eyes just narrowed as they scouted out the dark of the passageway, noticing the irregular lumps that lined the floor. Dead. All of them. Naruto just snarled and his hand clenched into fists before he took a calming breath to relax himself. His eyes pierced through the darkness, using his latent night vision to pick out the little details that even Gaara couldn't. There are explosive tags rigged all around the walls. It's a giant death trap. Gaara nodded in understanding. Can you disable them? Naruto just shook his head quickly. No, not in time. The other one, Sasori, if I remember from Taiuya right, will get away. Gaara just sighed, and with a flick of his wrist both Jinchuriki were lifted up into the air and carried over the immense walls on a cloud of sand. Gaara may not have had the reserves that Naruto did, but they were still impressive. His sand manipulation was also highly economical to his chakra consumption. It meant he still had a lot left in him for the fight that was surely to come when they caught up to the famed puppet master. They landed on the ground silently, very carefully looking around for any more traps while they simultaneously scouted for any signs of the other Akatsuki member. Their only warning was a flash of steel before Gaara's automatic defense intercepted an attack. Naruto was actually a little surprised. He hadn't even seen the attack yet Gaara's defense blocked it like it was nothing. His sand never used to be that fast. It seemed learning his father's magnet release increased his control over his main element. For Naruto, his only warning was the slight whistle of the wind before he bent his body back, watching the tail-like blade sail over his torso. It whipped around in the air for a short period, emerging from the sand like a scorpion's tail, before sliding back down. Gaara didn't give it the chance to attack them again as he crouched down on the ground and placed a hand to the floor. He extended his senses through the sand, looking for any disturbances that weren't just small insects. He smirked as he felt the slight vibrations that were caused when somebody uses the underground fish projection technique. He clenched his hand, homing in on the signature before attempting to crush it with the sand already around Sasori. Naruto could only watch as Gaara concentrated with his eyes closed, seeing his eyes moving about under his eyelids. He didn't even flinch as the metal tail re-emerged from the ground and attempted to strike him, the sand defense batting away the semi-flexible steel appendage like it was made of paper. Suddenly the sand burst up as Sasori was forced out of hiding before he could be completely crushed. He landed a good distance away from the two as Gaara calmly stood up, turning almost painfully slowly towards their attacker. Not much could be seen thanks to the cloak and straw hat which obscured much of the man's body and face. A small cloth hung across his jaw, leaving the only visible part of his body his bloodshot and hardened eyes. So you managed to kill that fool Deidara. Why am I not surprised? He would have known better than to keep me waiting. His voice was gravely and deep and he spoke with clearly enunciated words. I suppose it's my job now to capture the two of you. Very well. I just hope that Leader Sama can still perform the extraction with your bodies riddled with poison. You're in luck. As I understand, the procedure takes 3 days, exactly the time it takes for my poison to slowly work its way through your system, slowly destroying your cells from the inside out. As soon as the last word was out of his mouth, a hand came out to rip away his face mask, revealing a wooden and puppet-like mouth. It opened wide as a hail of senbon erupted from somewhere deep inside what they now knew to be a puppet. Gaara simply stretched out an arm and a wall of sand caught every one of the projectiles before they could get close. The puppet's mouth closed again, revealing a sneer, or the closest puppet equivalent. So it's true, you really can manipulate the sands to your whims. Gaara remained silent. Talking during a fight wasn't really his thing. Naruto, on the other hand, was itching to go. Sasori's poison stopped him from rushing in though. While Kyuubi might have been able to deal with it eventually, if it was as complex as the puppeteer made it out to be, then it would disable him long enough for the sooner missing nin to land a more lethal blow. Well, are you going to attack yet? I hate to be kept waiting. Gaara just crossed his arms over his chest, assuming the most indifferent stance imaginable. I have no need to attack. The sands are mine to control and you currently stand in a desert. As if voicing its silent approval of its master's declaration, the sand around Sasori suddenly leapt into the air, trying to cocoon the man to crush him to death, or at least the puppet, which was the main concern right now. The steel tail-like blade just whipped around in a large spiral, dicing the sand into particles before it could become dense and cause him harm. Gaara, where is Sasori? The redhead didn't look around, making sure to keep his eyes squarely on the puppet, relying on his defense to stave off any surprise attacks. Inside the puppet, Naruto looked back at the hunched-over figure in surprise. What? How do you know? He smirked a little. It actually looked a bit creepy to those that weren't used to him. You forget that Kankuro is a puppeteer. I have been around him long enough to recognize chakra threads when I see them. The puppet has none attached to the outside, which means they must be from within. Naruto looked around again at Sasori inside his puppet shell. It would certainly rectify the issues puppeteers have with being targeted instead of their puppets. Very good Kazekage. Yes, this is Hiriko, one of my finer creations. Let me show you why. The cloak was suddenly ripped away from the body, revealing the form of a very muscular man down on all fours with the bladed tail whipping about above him, further emulating the animal Sasori was named for. The blade emerged from a demonic-looking mask set on its lower back, looking like a piece of armor. There was a strange contraption on its left arm that looked like a large glove with cylinders poking out of it. Let me see just how extensive your defense is. The puppet raised its left arm and suddenly all of the cylinders shot out of the glove with a hiss of steam. Once they were sufficiently high, they broke open, unleashing a veritable hail of senbon, all surely laced with deadly poison. Even Naruto wasn't sure that Kyuubi could heal him if too many of those struck home. Luckily for him, Gaara just made another hand motion and a dome of sand erupted all around them, completely blocking off the metal rain. Interesting, the senbon didn't even dig in, merely bounce off. That means you can harden your sand by compressing it. Gaara let the wall dissolve so they could see their target again. Naruto didn't like flying blind like Gaara could. The redhead merely maintained contact by focusing his attention on the minute vibrations through the ground, building a perfect three-dimensional image of the outside of his dome. I may have to alter my plan a bit. The Hiriko puppet lifted its other arm and a small canister shot out of a concealed space in the palm. Gaara went to lift another blockade, hoping that the man would simply run out of weapons to use so he could end this swiftly. The last thing he saw before sand blocked his vision was the canister hiss and break apart, revealing a heavily rotating drill head. Both he and Naruto were surprised when the metal container burst through the sand before the cap broke off and a heavy purple mist was ejected at high pressures. Gaara made a move to jump back and away from the deadly gaseous poison before he could breathe it in, but Naruto beat him to it. Wind style, great breakthrough jutsu. Naruto breathed in heavily, only inhaling trace amounts of the deadly mist before he breathed out, expelling the gas away from the two of them. He panted slightly as a burning sensation erupted from his lungs before it was cleansed. Even so, it left him panting on the ground, clutching his chest in pain. Gaara knew he would be all right. He still had the puppet to deal with, so he dropped the barrier, prepared for the puppeteer's next attack. You two working together seem to nullify many of Hiriko's main fighting abilities. In that case, Sasori stopped his monologue as soon as he saw the Naruto on the ground clutching his chest burst into a cloud of smoke, the poison becoming too much for the clone. Rasengan. If puppets could be surprised, then Hiriko was. He never expected the swirling vortex of energy that erupted from the ground beneath his exposed belly. The condensed chakra easily ripped through the wood of the puppet, splintering it as it tore through the weakness on its underside. Before he could finish it, a shadow darted out of the puppet's body and dashed across the sand to get a safe distance away from them. Or at least as safe as one could be when standing in a desert while fighting Gaara no Subaku. Interesting, nobody has ever forced me out of Hiriko since I joined the Akatsuki. I would almost commend you if I didn't know you were going to die anyway. Naruto backed away from the unveiled puppeteer, not knowing what tricks he had up his sleeves. From memory he knew Kankuro could seal his puppets into scrolls. That meant Sasori could as well, so there was no telling how many he hid across his person. The man turned around to face them, only to reveal the face of a boy no older than Naruto or Gaara with unruly red hair wearing typical Akatsuki robes. He stood confidently across from the on the sand, unperturbed by the fact it could erupt around him at any moment. This has been a good fight, Gaara of the desert. How about a reward? Why don't you say hello to your predecessor? In a flash of movement there was a burst of smoke, and when it cleared, a robed figure floated above Sasori's shoulder. Its long black hair hung in a disorderly manner about its unsettlingly human-like face. Meet the third Kazekage, Naitaki of the Iron Sand. Gaara's eyes narrowed as he looked upon the face of the puppet that looked back with dead, glassy eyes. So you are the one who killed the third. Sasori just smirked. The man should have known better than to deny my right to teach puppetry as it should have been taught. None of those ready-made puppets that only weaken sooner. The puppeteer caught himself, reeling back his emotions after letting the young cage get the better of him like this. Truly, your sand manipulation is a curious ability. After all this is over, you will take pride of place in my collection. But first, let's seize how two legendary manipulators do against one another. Neither Jinchuriki could react fast enough before the puppet opened its mouth and exhaled a dark cloud of fine iron particles. However, what Sasori wasn't expecting was for Gaara's hand to suddenly come up and his control over the fine granules lessen. Gaara seemed to be visibly straining as his hand trembled, held out in front of him with his palm facing outwards. There was a loud groaning sound as the iron sand convulsed in midair, conflicted between two differing magnetic fields. Gaara may have been the weaker manipulator, still unused to magnet release, but on the other end the sand was only being controlled via proxy, which lessened its efficiency. Soon the sand began to be pushed back, condensing as it went, moving towards the puppet and its master as it gained speed, and Gaara's body trembled from the exertion. Sasori could only look on, shocked, as the mass of sand tore its way towards him, obliterating the third Kazekage puppet before the master puppeteer could pull it out of the way. Before it could slam into him, Sasori jumped up as high as he could, two rotary blades on his back whirring to life as they carried him up above the sand, hovering like a hummingbird. His cloak had been torn to pieces in the process, revealing his true body, lines along the joints indicating just what the ex-Sunanin had done to himself. Well, that was unexpected. I was uninformed you knew the magnet release. While certainly annoying, I still have more than enough to deal with. Sasori made a simple mistake that could almost be described as a rookie error. He had taken his eye off his opponent. He looked down to see a grinning Naruto hanging onto his legs before the body swung up with incredible upper body strength and planted a foot directly in the redhead's face. Naruto heard a crack, but he felt the blade spinning on Sasori's back come around in an attempt to shred him, so he let go and dropped to the ground with a soft thud. Both he and Gaara looked up to see that Sasori hadn't even flinched as a large crack appeared across his otherwise pristine youthful face. Your efforts are in vain. I have transcended mortality. This body feels no pain, no exhaustion, not fatigue or injury. If it breaks, I repair it. If it is destroyed, I rebuild it, and if I find an imperfection, I fix it. There is nothing you can do to stop me. Naruto just sighed into his palm. He certainly attracted the strangest of enemies. God complex much. Sasori remained impassive, not responding to the jibe as he focused on Gaara, to him the more serious opponent. He saw a kunai approach from the corner of his eye, and the cable in his stomach shot out and swatted it away from him to land harmlessly in the sand, too far for it to be of any use to his enemies. Your Horatian ability is well known to me, Uzumaki. Your kunai will not get close enough. The flexible cord flicked around a few times as if in agreement. Gaara, can't you just drop the desert on him or something? Gaara almost looked back, amused that Naruto thought he could do such a feat. It wasn't that he had actually tried to move a desert, but it sounded highly improbable. Manipulating that amount or iron sand was tiring. If I attempt such a maneuver, it would surely kill me, Jinchuriki or not. Naruto just nodded with his mouth curled to one side in thought. However, Sasori didn't particularly feel like waiting for them to come up with a plan to defeat him. One of the scrolls on his back flashed briefly before two hollow tubes appeared from his palms, one aimed at each of his attackers. A brilliant jet of flame burst from each tube, roaring down on their targets as Gaara pulled up his defense and Naruto simply ran, using his advantageous speed to outrun the flames licking at his heels. Gaara was surprised when he saw the barrel of the flamethrower turned and the flames went from scalding hot red to intense white, nearly forcing him to cover his eyes. It finally ran out of fuel and the flames petered out, but Gaara's eyes widened when he realized the barrier he had erected had been turned into glass from the sheer heat from the weapon. Before he could react, the extendable wire shot out, smashing through the glass and impacting heavily with his stomach. The only thing stopping the sharpened tip from piecing him was his sand armor. Instead, he was simply flung backwards to land harshly on the ground. Naruto could finally stop running, wincing as the burns he had received on his back and heels slowly healed. He had just fought Deidara, so he was quickly tiring in this fight. He would have to end it quickly or risk getting him and Gaara hurt or captured. Using nearly the last of his stamina, Naruto created as many clones as he could, roughly 500 in total, to which Sasori cast a curious eye. He smirked as another scroll flashed brightly before disappearing. So you have an army. Well, how about you meet the army that took down an entire nation? In an enormous explosion of smoke, Naruto's eyes widened as the sun was blotted out. A mass shadow appeared above the desert as hundreds of puppets littered the sky, all connected to Sasori by chakra threads in a compartment in his chest. Naruto just felt his shoulders go limp as all the clones looked up in awe. Well shit. There was a moment when the world seemed to stand still, not a single grain of sand moved across the desert and nobody breathed. Then it was over, a gust of wind rolled across the dunes and the clones rushed in, met quickly by the many puppets as the two forces battled it out. Sasori maintained his height, watching over the battlefield to prevent any surprise attacks like the one that nearly caught him out before. His glassy eyes darted over the ground while his hands deftly controlled his small army as they wiped out batches of the clones in throngs. He smiled at the pathetic attempt to defeat him. For every puppet he lost, Naruto would lose 10 clones. It wouldn't be enough to even the playing field. His eyes widened as something bright flashed through the sky too fast for him to effectively maneuver out the way with his rotors. His puppet eyes saw a streak of gold slice through one of his propellers before he lost control and ungracefully hit the ground in a crouch. He stood up as quickly as his artificial joints would allow, only for his body to suddenly be littered with impacts. His eyes blinked a few times in shock as the many puppets around him all convulsed before falling limp to the sandy floor. He slowly looked down at his body, seeing the many poison-laced senbon sticking out of his body, or more importantly the single metal needle implanted directly in his core. Oh, how ironic. And with that, Sasori of the red sand fell to his knees, dead before his already lifeless head hit the ground. The multitude of Naruto clones standing around him breathed a sigh of relief before popping out of existence, leaving the original to watch as Gaara withdrew his gold dust back into the pouch on his belt. The two looked at each other, smiling weakly as they glanced around the battlefield, hundreds of broken or lifeless puppets littering the desert. I'm not cleaning this up. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.